So, Hebrews. This will be a metaphorical teaching. For some of you, you will immediately connect with it. Others will say, like, wait, I don't even understand. Why are you talking about coffee? Well, I'm going to be talking some about coffee today. And part of the reason is that I think connecting thoughts and ideas with visceral things that we actually experience every day are very powerful connections. And so one of the strongest senses is smell, and one of the strongest smells that you might smell in different places is coffee. Coffee is something that I have heard this exact statement made by many people. Some of you are coffee drinkers. Some of you are just coffee sniffers. And what I mean by that is it's actually a very rare person across, if you do polls, who says, I hate the way coffee smells. I mean, I haven't met many people like that. There's a few, because any smell can be something that people don't like. But I have talked to countless people who say coffee smells so great, I don't like the taste, so I don't drink coffee. And you go, okay, I get it. So just keep that little thought in mind here. I love the smell of coffee, but I don't like the taste, because that is going to be a real eye-opener into what this book is all about. I titled it Hebrews, but of course, I couldn't resist. Hebrews, right? Hebrews what? Well, God brews grace, okay? There's something that he wants us to taste. He wants us to taste grace. And before you taste it, on some level, you are aware of it, right? You might be drawn toward that smell. And so when I think about what that means, again, Hebrews, God brews up something called grace in the Bible. And it takes some time to make it. It's made from different ingredients, okay? If you think about it that way, there's a flavor to grace. And one of the things about grace, whatever it is, if I were to give you just a dictionary definition or a biblical definition, and people have tried, and I've tried, man, the Bible even says, taste and see that God is good. I mean, there's people who I just wish on some level that instead of us having a theological discussion, that I'm like, but can you tell me of a time when God was good in your life and you just knew it? Can you tell of a time when someone treated you with grace and you felt it and experienced it? Do you know what I'm talking about with that? That it's just kind of like, this place smells like grace. One of the things that our house smells like is coffee, but it smells like many other great smells, and that's because of my wife. When I think about that, I can go into a place, and there are certain cars. I do car line in the morning at our school. And there are certain cars that you drink deeply of the smells that come out of that car because it smells nice. And there's others that go, hold your breath. They're getting out. It smells like whatever it smells like, the hamburger that was left under the car seat and all that kind of stuff. But I've just come to know that different things have different flavors with it, And I put tasting strong grace because there's some people who portray grace as if it was God's weakness. Right? Oh, well, he's just giving people grace. He's letting people get away with things. And I say, not really. He's letting people get away from things, not away with things. Grace is something that actually can change dramatically the choices somebody makes. Okay? Really, when it's understood. And so I want to think about a couple of thoughts with you. And first of all, I want to tell you a little story just to start off. This is from Scott's youth, and it was when I first tasted coffee. And again, we are going to get into a Bible study, I promise. But here's the point. I was at church, right? I was brought up at church. And we would go Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and every day in between to something else. It seemed like I just felt like I was always in church. And my friends and I, we had fun because we just goofed around. All we did was dork around wherever we were. So church was cool to me, but I was mainly avoiding any of the talking and all that stuff that would go on. That was adult stuff. But one thing we did want was whatever that was in that styrofoam cup. They sure were interested in that. That seemed to be more interesting than the communion or anything else. It's like the whole group would just, as soon as the doors would open, over to the coffee pot, and then they'd go have the Bible study, and everybody back over to the coffee pot. And I'm like, what is that stuff? My parents didn't really drink it at home. So my friend and I one day decided we're going to get in there and we're going to get coffee. Man, this stuff must be the most wonderful stuff that has ever existed, right? And of course, it smelled wonderful. So, we were brought up on syrupy sodas and just all kinds of things, right? So we went over there when no one was looking because we weren't allowed to have coffee as kids. And so we go over there and we get in the styrofoam cup when nobody's looking, like, someone had left it out. And we went downstairs and we went to the basement of, this Colorado church. And we're down there and we're like, it's going to be amazing. Oh, what is wrong with that? It was just disgusting. First of all, it was room temp. It was left over from a meeting, right? All that kind of stuff when we had, it was just absolutely terrible. And that was my taste of coffee. And I went forever in my life without ever having it again after that. It's like, bleh. And I think, again, when I think about that, again, don't lose sight of the metaphor. This isn't a commercial for coffee. What it is the reality that lots of people have different experiences in life with church or in things, and they think, well, God's going to be this or God's going to be that. And I see people doing this and I see them flocking to that. And why do they do that? And then they taste something and it's just terrible and bitter and nasty. And they're like, well, I tried Christianity. I tried Christ. I'm not into that. It's disgusting, really. And you go, wait, God says, could I make you a cup of something that if you tried it, you might go, wow, hey, that's different. That's good. And see, again, when I think about what that means for you, for me, grace is a grown-up taste. And this is a huge concept if you understand it, if I understand it, which is that the Bible is a progressive revelation, meaning God revealed things in the New Testament that were hidden in the Old Testament. And they weren't hidden because he was trying to not have humanity understand grace. It's that it took time through these things. The same way when a person is born, one of the things that my personality style, it's pretty funny, my kids have verified it. I have a problem, which is that I relate to kids of all ages as if they were old and mature, right? So if there's a 3-year-old just having a moment, I'm like, I wouldn't be down there on the floor because there's like a lot of people have walked on that floor with their feet and outside there's, and I'm reasoning with a kid who's unreasonable, right? They're just, and they're looking at me like, what in the world? And my kids would all say the same thing, that when they were young, they were confused half the time because I'd be going, I think you deep down, you know what to do in this case. And they're like, I don't. Tell me what to do. And I'm like, I don't want to tell you what to do. I want you to tell you what to do. I want you to, come to an understanding of that. And mom would just go brush your teeth, and when I think about that, there's an age and stage where a person has to have some training and rules and regulations. But guess what? Over time, giving grace is not just letting somebody go crazy and not brush their teeth and not do anything that leads to a better life. It's that those things transfer from external to internal, right? That's what it is. And when you think about the transfer of the Old Testament to the New Testament, this is what it is. And so there are all these things in the Old Testament that if somebody just has that, do you realize they have the picture book that doesn't have the point? And if somebody just has the New Testament, in some ways, they actually miss a lot of the things that God was trying to explain. And they go, well, I don't know even why we do this. And I go, Hebrews will let you know why we do this. It'll let you know why these things are important. It lets you know the process. And again, when I think of grace as a grown-up taste, it's an acquired taste. And I know this sounds funny because some people go, I love grace. You go, do you? See, a lot of people love the way it smells, but they hate the way it tastes. Because grace is actually a lot more complex flavor than you might think. Again, did you know it's really easy to just have a law? Tell me the 3 things I'm supposed to do. Okay, doc, tell me the 3 foods I'm supposed to have and the 3 foods I'm not. Just tell me what to do. Don't we go through life sometimes to just tell me what to do? Just tell me what not to do. Can I go in or go out? And you go, well, I don't know. You tell me. What do you think is wise in this case? You go, well, I don't want to think. I want you to think for me. Did you know most of society lives that way? And they love the idea of freedom, but freedom actually comes with tremendous responsibilities. And there's a lot of times I've seen kids that if you give them freedom on an assignment, they don't want it. They're like, tell me exactly how many words. As many as it takes. See, I think about this. I had the greatest, don't be offended by this, but give me grace if you are. But it came from a English teacher that I had that was probably in her late 60s when she was teaching me in the 1980s in high school. And we asked her, how long should this paper be? And she said, a paper should be like a woman's skirt. It should be long enough to cover the subject and short enough to keep it interesting. And I've never forgotten that. I was like, gosh, okay, how long should a paper be? And I go, well, I can't. Well, my English teacher told me it. I don't know. But I've thought about that so many times. It's like, no, word count. Give me exactly 500 words. And it's like, well, were those 500 wasted words? Or, I got to have some parameters here. And I think about that. Parameters are important. But grace is a place of wide openness that you go like, well, God isn't telling you what to do. He's asking you, what do you think you should do in that case? Well, I don't know. Just tell me what to do. Tell me how generous am I supposed to be? Well, I don't know. I'm not going to give you a number. I'm going to give you an idea that sometimes the widow's mite that gave less as an amount than the person who dumped a huge amount in the bucket actually gave more. And you go, see, I like the way grace smells, but I don't know if I want. It's a dangerous place, kind of. It's a scary place because it's more of a grown-up taste. Okay, now thinking about that shadow and substance, I was so excited. Again, sometimes just a picture will do it for me. I'm like, how did someone out there take the exact picture I needed for this teaching? Thank you very much, whoever you are. But you have beans, you have grounds, and you have coffee, and you have this progress, and you have a shadow in there. And I'm like, thank you, Lord. You have provided what I need. But this book, and I'm giving it an intro because we're going to get into the details of it, is going to show you the shadow and substance and the difference between the two. And the whole thing about it is, if you think of my hand with a light behind it, there's going to be a shadow, right? But there's substance. Like, everyone here realizes that the reason there's a shadow on the ground is that there's a substance here in a light source, right? That's what creates a shadow. And so when you think about it, all of the Old Testament is a shadowy thing. But it's because there was a light that God was shining on a substance that he's like, I want you to understand the substance that created the shadow. But if you stay in the shadow, you're just in the dark. You don't really see why I did what I was doing, right? And again, that's a grown-up idea. That's something that people would say like, well, I don't know if people are ready for that in modern society. Give them a sermonette for Christianettes, just a tiny little thought, just something like that. People don't want to think anymore. And you're like, you know what? I think people do want to think. They want to think these things through because smart people leave churches in droves going, they don't talk about anything that actually has any meat to it. After about the 4th time, I'm thinking to myself, I've already heard that. I've already know that. I don't understand where we're going with all these things. So I think about the shadow, the Old Testament. What was the shadow? Well, Hebrews is going to talk about it. They were well aware of it. And I want you to put yourself for just a minute in an original reader's shoes or sandals, as it were, which is they were being called to Christ. They were being called away from shadow. They were being called out of shadow and into substance. And that sounds amazing until all your friends stay in the shadow and say, we don't like you anymore because you don't go to the temple with us. Or my mom says that you're actually not approved by God because you didn't do this ritual that we've been doing since the time we were born and all this sort of stuff. And you go like, does that stuff happen in real life? Oh, you bet it does. It still happens today, but it happened in their day. It happened very strongly. And that's what Hebrews is about. If you want the the big picture before we get into it, it's that it's a writing from a person to people who had gone forward and felt the resistance of going forward into freedom. And everyone said, come back into the dark. Don't go into the light. Don't go into the light. Come back to the dark. Come back to this side, right? Because it's familiar. It's comfortable. It's sugary and sweet. It makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, you're not going to Passover this year? And it's like, no, I'm not. But I know why we did it. I understand now what it was about. I understand what it was pointing to. And they're like, oh, Mr. Know-it-all now. Things like that. And you go, well, no, I'm just free to do it and free not to do it. Well, you're actually eating a certain food on Friday or not eating a food on Friday or wearing a skirt of a longer or a shorter length than we used to or all this sort of stuff. And you go, yep. I'm exercising some personal discretion and freedom. And you go, whoa, I like the way that smells. I like the way that sounds. I agree with it in principle, but I don't agree with it in practice. And I don't like the way you are doing it relative to the way I think you should be doing it and all that, right? I mean, does any of this connect with people's actual real life experience day to day? It sure does mine. And so when you think about that, it's like God says, I'm calling you through this time to see these things for all time. I was heading toward the substance. And this is the substance of the New Testament. I don't know if you can see it. But there's a happy face there. The happy face in the foam, right? And you look down and you go, oh, put it on eBay. It's famous, or something like that. But you go, the substance, it can seem a little bit harder to grasp, right? This is the irony of it, isn't it? Which is the shadow was tangible. There's a temple. And the substance, the thing of actual value was more ethereal. It was more non-physical, right? This is the inversion of that is what made this so hard for people to understand and so easy to go back to. Well, where's the priest? Well, there isn't one. Yeah, but I need to confess my sins to the priest. And he's like, well, Jesus is that priest for you. You don't have to go into a little box. And I don't mean to, again, offend anyone, but it was just that idea of, wait, there isn't a person on earth that you need to go to deal with the things on earth. You need to go to that personal priest that you have who's actually inside you in the work of Christ. And you go like, whoa, I don't know, man. I just, are you sure? I don't see him. I don't see it. I don't... all of that stuff, again, ritual. Did you know that we're just habitually ritual as people? We just, when you look at psychology, people just get into rituals. They are comforted by the comfortable and familiar, even terrible stuff. Like I could get you very familiar and comfortable with sacrificing sheep. Now I think of it and I go, I ain't sacrificing a sheep for my sin. That doesn't make any sense at all. I would never do that. I love little animals. And you go, okay. But for some people, they're like, I feel guilty because I didn't sacrifice a sheep for this sin. Right? You see what I'm saying? That we're so habitual in what we do that God had to get us to break a habit. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But again, the substance is the New Testament, the New Covenant. The new thing, and it's all of God. But think about what a shadow is. It's rituals, it's rules, it's laws. Again, it's just a tiny little foretaste of what God was trying to reveal to humanity for all time. But as they went through it, people started to focus on it and say, it's all about the beans. Or it's all about the grounds. It's all this. And he said, well, he's headed towards something. It's all for something. And there's a point to the end. And can I tell you what it is if you don't already know? It's this, substance. It's a relationship ruled by love. See, and what's funny about that is think about loving rules or being ruled by love. See, if I love rules, right, I can be a very nasty person, but I'm doing the right thing because I am keeping the law, right? But think of laws that are horrible. Or their basic outcome is contrary to what God would want somebody to do. I'm throwing you off a cliff because you don't agree with me, or something like that. And you go, what? And again, if you think about these things, and I hope you do, this is such a huge divide that this is, to me, the issue. I mean, if you really want to know what the issue is, God thinks this is the issue. This is where he was headed with his entire message of the gospel, which is a relationship ruled by love can handle freedom, the acquired taste, the grown-up taste of grace. And until that point, the book of Galatians, if you ever read that one, actually specifically says to you and to me that we were kept under a tutor until we were ready for freedom, right? So a person who doesn't have some degree of guideline prior to coming to the understanding of grace, well, that person is going to think grace is grease. I just slide into whatever I want. And God thinks that's okay. But that's not it either. That's why I say it's strong grace. So we come back to this idea, Hebrews, tasting strong grace. Let me get into the actual text with you real quickly here. As we go into it, look what it says. God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past. Do you see that? Very clearly saying this is how it was to the fathers by the prophets. Who are the fathers? It's all the Old Testament, founding fathers of that, has in these last days, when is it talking about? It's talking about the new covenant, the split there before Jesus came and after Jesus came, spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom he also made the worlds. I mean, wow, there's a lot. Okay. I'll throw some of these things in. You don't need to know them for the test because there won't be one, but I'm just reminding you that some of these things are really a huge deal. The first 4 verses of this book are a single sentence. Okay, it's a single sentence in the original language. So it's a run-on sentence, right? Because a lot is said. But let me say this about it. This is the biggest thought to me. I put it in red because God is the first word of this book. You're going to know right away it's going to be a big deal. I don't know. Are we waiting to find out?
He just flew in.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, what happened? A hawk?
Yeah.
Hi. So, wow, that's amazing. Hopefully he'll come see us. Well, or stay there long enough to see him after the service. But what timing? God is the first word of this book. And one of the things that theologians like to debate about the book of Hebrews is who wrote it. We're not going to know the answer to that definitively, but there's people who are like, who wrote it? Because in Greek society, what you would typically do, and you've seen it in a lot of the letters, you would write a letter and the author would come first. It would say Paul, an apostle of Christ, and to the whoever, and the first word is the author. And you go like, first word, it doesn't tell us who wrote this. It just gets right into it. God did this in various ways in the past. The emphasis was on people and human authorship and all this. Moses said this and Abraham did that. And he says, Jesus is the person you need to know. You don't need to think about the authorship of this book as much as you do the subject of this book, right? It's a book about God, and it's a book specifically about the fact that Jesus is God. Now, again, that's a mystery that I'll never solve for you or for myself prior to seeing him face to face fully. But you think about this, it's God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. The Bible makes it clear that God is 3 in 1. And so God the Father and God the Son, Jesus, it says, is all that God is, but he came to his creation as a humble man. So the people met him and he said, "Hi, I'm God. Nice to meet you." But he didn't say it that way, right? I mean, because that would be a little bit weird, right? I mean, let's just put it in those terms. If one of you was God as a man, or God as a person, it would be a little strange meeting people, right? What do you do? Well, I created the earth and everything in it, all the planets and everything. Oh, well, nice. I work over to school. It just kind of, the power differential is massive, right? And so he humbled himself and came. And not only that, but he showed such grace in his interaction with people that all the know-it-alls, he was a show-it-all. He said, this is what love looks like. You want to understand what it looks like to operate God? It's not being this person who looks down on everyone because of their sin. It's a person who came down to people because of sin and lifted them up. And so I think about all that and you say, wow, that's a big first word. It is a big first word. So who's the author of this book? Well, I have a sneaky suspicion, as many do, that it actually was the Apostle Paul. That he said, I got called to the Gentiles, but I really wish I could reach my own people. And this book is so steeped in all of that stuff. There aren't a whole lot of guys who knew as much about Judaism as he did. So there's a chance that it was. But, again, the glory is supposed to go not to the author, but to the subject. And so here you go. God's the first word of this book. And when I talk about that, it says in these last days, he's spoken to us by his son. And there's some people who always want to know, looking at the news, the morning news, are these the last days, Scott? Yes, they are. They are. We've been in overtime since Jesus came. I don't know how long overtime goes. I don't know how many more days we got. But yes, there isn't another section like the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Newer Testament. That's exactly what this is saying. It's saying God pointed up to a point, and once Jesus came, everything points either back to him or forward to him, but there's no further point. I mean, yeah, but what else you got, God? I mean, you came in the form of a man and gave your life for people who hated you and forgave them through that process. That's cool, but is there a sequel? Because there isn't a sequel. What else can I do more than this, right? And that's exactly, again, the message of Hebrews is there were people who try it out of wherever they came, whatever religious system they were part of, and they go, yeah, I tried it. It was cool, but I don't know. I'm thinking about going back to the shadow because I miss it. And I miss the people who are all in that. And you go, the author says, don't do it, because going back from this is going back from the answer. You're regressing no matter what direction you're going from Jesus. I mean, that is a big thought. But it says you can't go in a direction for, yeah, Jesus is cool for kids, but I've kind of moved past that a little bit. And you're like, really? God, who in various times did this, it says the last word is from God for the world. The last word is Jesus. The last word about God is Jesus. There isn't more that could happen than this. And this is where he's trying to say is God took so long for Jesus to come on the scene. Part of the reason, at least in my own perspective after all these years, is that if a guy had just shown up out of nowhere and said, hi, I'm God, nice to meet you, you'd go, yeah, can I see some proof? How about the entirety of the Old Testament as predictive proof, and over again, like we even looked at last week, the same story over and over again, told 1,000 different ways until Jesus comes on the scene and says all that stuff, the prophets and the words that God used before, the pictures painted in the Old Testament, all that points to me. So that you would know that when I said I'm who I said I am, you would believe it, and you would know that I did what I said I would do. Okay, so when you think about that, there's a point to the Old Testament. You couldn't just bring Jesus onto the scene with no history. It wouldn't make any sense. And so in these days, he's spoken to us by his son. It's the last word, and I put this, it's the best word. There isn't something better than Jesus. And when you think about this, why do I return to this? I wanted to return to this slide because, again, this is the thing I'm hoping to connect in your brain in some visceral way, some sensory way that kind of all of your senses are touched by this, including the sixth sense of faith, which is people say, I love the smell of coffee, but I don't like the way it tastes. There's a lot of people who this is the truth that should be laid over their life. I love the smell of grace, but I don't want to offer it to you. Because if I do, then that's not fair, because this, grace is very interesting. See, on the cross, Jesus gave grace to people who were spitting on him, beating him. And he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what to... Well, that's not fair. Of course it's not fair. It's grace. Grace is about undeserved favor. And deep down, somewhere in my mind, I'm as human as they get, I think. I'm troubled by grace sometimes. In its pure form, it's not syrupy. It's not always sweet. There's a bittersweetness to it. There's a complexity to the reality of it, where you go, that smells good. Oh, that tastes, I don't know. That's a strong taste, man. I have to forgive someone, but they don't deserve it. God, you don't understand. I did the right thing and they did the wrong thing. And he goes, give them grace. Well, why should I? They don't deserve it. Okay, like you did. These are big girl thoughts. This is an acquired taste, my friend. Grace is an adult idea. What's funny about it, again, is loving the smell of grace, but not liking the taste. Len and I have noticed over the years that a lot of times the more somebody insists on grace somewhere in something they're doing, the less you get shown it. It's like grace upon grace church. And you go there and they just beat the tar out of you because your shoe was untied or something. And you're like, what? Y'all very vocal about it, but you're not very visible in your outlay of it. And again, it's not to put that on somebody. That can be, don't universalize that. I'm sure there's some very grace-filled places with that in the name. But the point is, humanity loves the concept until I've got to do it. But people ought to pay for the wrong they've done. And you go, well, Jesus paid for the wrong we've done. You go, but how's that worked out practically if somebody hurts me? And you go, well, there's still a place for law and order. The Bible talks about that. There's still a place for somebody to go to jail for what they did, but not go to hell for what they did, right? That's the point. There's a lot more nuance to it. And see, I think about this again. If I could make an appeal, this is the whole of my life's message boiled down in a way, which is like over next door, there's music, right? And we love to put labels on stuff. This is R&B. Okay, great. This is soul. You go, what's the difference between soul and R&B? Well, I know, but you might not want to get into that discussion. Then you go, okay, we've got both kinds over here, country and Western. There's both kinds of music. And then there's bluegrass, and there's that's heavy metal. Oh, I don't even look in that bin, and stuff like that. And you go, oh, here's what I'm looking for, Christian music. Okay, the Christian, I can only look in this bin because I'm a Christian. Put it in there. And you go, that's simple, isn't it? What's more complex than that? Well, music is nuanced, right? And there might be a song by an artist that I would not ordinarily think had anything to offer me. And yet that song may be exactly what God uses to change my life so radically, and it never even came close to the Christian music bin. And you think about that and you go, yeah, but how do I sort through all that? You go, that's grace. That's what grace does. And it's not overlaying my personal preference onto you. It is taking my life and saying, I'm going to act in wisdom and accountability to God and to the people who are around me. And I can't change the world, but this will be my world. I love the taste of grace, my friends. And when I think about that, tasting and seeing what is good, but knowing that, again, it's not syrupy sweet. It's not immediately something that I go like, love everything about it. It's so easy to drink. It might be a little different than that. Notice this. Again, people say, like, wait a minute, he created everything, but he was made better. He actually inherited things. This is where people get messed up and get all kinds of crazy doctrines about the fact that Jesus isn't really God and he's just a created being. He said, no. What he's saying is he emptied of himself of all of the divine things except that he was God. And as he came along, he did things here on the earth that actually accomplished what grace is all about, right? So it says he by himself purged our sin. Who gets to do that? I can't do that. The priest can't do that. Nobody can do that. No human can do that for you. God alone can forgive sins. And that's why when the religious rulers always were grinding against him, because they're like, you keep doing things that you can't do unless you're God. Tell us who you are. And he said, I have already told you who I am, but you don't want to hear it. Because you like the way it smells, but you don't like the way it tastes when it tells you, you priest are a sinner too. See, I don't know if you read news stories like I do, but man, this isn't to throw shade at anyone. It's to throw shade at everyone, which is what the Bible does. It says we're all in the shadows, folks. But you know what's interesting? The more repressive and legalistic a society is, the more likely statistically it is to have the most heinous and horrible of crimes. When you think of Amish, I don't know what you think about. I think of really good cinnamon rolls, because they make really good cinnamon rolls, but I don't think of sin rampant, but just an expose story from just today that I read talked about this morning. Perfect timing, wasn't even looking for it. And it just talked about in the Amish community, there's such a code of silence and everything else that there's rampant sexual abuse throughout that community. And that, you know what they do? They just, we don't talk about that. And you go like, so they got a massive clamp down, and yet, why is that? You could generalize that principle over and over again because the Bible said the same. Paul said, the law took advantage of my flaw and made me do it. Like, all you got to do to get a bunch of kids touching a bench is put a do not touch wet paint sign on that, and I'll be like, oh yeah? Why is that? Because that's human nature. And so an acquired taste of grace is something where you go, I don't need a penalty. You don't have to tell me what subsection of subsection tells me not to touch and smear the red paint off the thing. I don't want that, because I've outgrown that need to do that. But isn't it funny that sometimes the more outwardly restrictive something is, some of the most, again, prolific serial killers came from extremely religious homes. You go, why is that? Hebrews will tell you that. So this gets as practical as it can get, because if you don't want to be a person who lives a hypocritical life or encourages others to do it, you know what it is? It's really found in what he was talking about here. He's saying, don't go back in the shadow, folks. Come into the light. Coming into the light is the very place where grace can grow, but sin really can't in those areas. It doesn't like the openness. But again, people love the smell, but when they taste it, sometimes they're like, I don't know, that's awkward. We're suddenly having some very difficult discussions. And you go, exactly, grace does that. And that's why it's so much better. But I will just shortcut a thought for you. These verses 15 to 14, if you go read them later, and I could read them here, but they basically say the same thing over and over again because he knew his audience. He's saying all other messengers and all other messages amount to a hill of beans if they're not pointing to Jesus. And he points out all the people they would have said, well, yeah, but what about the prophets? And he goes, it's a non-profit organization. And it doesn't have anything. The prophets were pointing to Jesus, and if they weren't, you missed their message. And then he goes on and on about the angels. Isn't it funny that people love bumper stickers about angels? I just love just me and my guardian angel, don't drive faster than your guardian angel can drive, and all that kind of stuff. And you go, why is it? Because it's non-challenging. But when you really look at the angels in the Bible, they were extraordinarily challenging, right? They weren't just kind of these things. But he says the angels, God says some amazing things about angels, their power and their capacities. And guess what? Things were said about Jesus in the Bible that were never said about angels. In fact, there's a point where, someone goes to worship an angel, and the angel says, don't do that. Do that for God alone. And yet Jesus accepted worship and encouraged worship in Scripture over and over and over again. So you go like, He's basically saying, guys, you got all your angel stickers everywhere. I'm not saying you got to take them off the fridge, but he's saying it's not about the angels, guys. The angels are all impressed with Jesus. They came to announce his birth as a little baby. Powerful angels came to say a little baby's more important than any of us. The priests were everything. The high priest, oh my goodness, if you couldn't touch that man, you couldn't even look at him in their society, right? I mean, the high priest has spoken. But in the Gospels, guess who the high priest is? There's multiple ones because it became a purchased position in their society. Whoever had the most money on eBay could bid for it. What's the current bid for a high priest? So you were honorary high priest, and they just kept giving, but it was a complete dishonor what was going on in all that. So here's people going into a system that had so lost God's thing that God's like, that is a shadowy, nasty thing. I'm bringing you the light of Jesus out of all that. He's the high priest. Don't lose the fact that just because a priest on earth misrepresented God, that doesn't have anything to do with God. God's more angry about that than you are. As outraged as I might be about someone in God's, speaking for God, misrepresenting God, that's more outrageous to God than it is to me. And it's pretty outrageous to me, And one of the things that's been hard actually over the years to be a pastor is all the disaster pastors out there. And I'm not saying I couldn't add my list to them because I'm as human as anyone. Again, I don't think I'm above anything. But I've looked at situations where people are like, evangelist this and you know what I'm talking about, where it's like, but there are humble people doing God's work all over the place who are paying the price for that. And people, you don't think that outrages that person, but it outrages God yet more than that. And so he says, not the priests, don't look to them for good or for bad. That are not really the answer. Not the kings. Oh, King David. Yeah, King David screwed up pretty bad. Not the rituals, not the do's and don'ts. I call it the do's and donuts. Donuts and coffee, right? Can't resist that. But the do's and don'ts, right? The donut touch that. Donut eat that, right? You can't have that, And the spiritualization of different things. Isn't it interesting how some people, even just thinking about the subject of coffee real quickly, there are places where they definitely go out for a beer after church, but never a coffee. Right, because coffee's got caffeine, it's a drug, right? But definitely have a beer. And then you go other places where I said, hey, anyone want to join me for a drink down the road? Well, it's got to be water if we're believers. Well, are there issues with all those things? Of course. Addictions come in all different ways, right? And that's why I think it's important to think about this, because what is it to backpedal into something? When you're coming out of something bad, I just think for a minute of something that's been destructive to you, that you think it may not even be against the law. Remember, what's funny about it is people think that law is everything, right? Well, I don't do that because there's a law against it. And you go, well, what if it's legal? Well, I still don't do it. Why? Oh, because I was taught it was bad. Okay, well, why don't you? And you start unlayering that a little bit. And what grace is the capacity to look at something that may be lawful and still be awful and say, not for me, thanks. It doesn't really do for me what I'm wanting to do to represent God and to head in the directions I want to go in, right? And that's a mature thought, right? And so that's why sometimes we have laws that something's illegal below a certain age, but above a certain age. Yeah, a lot of this is built-in Judeo-Christian ethic into our life, which is we say, young and dumb, you might be old and dumb, but it's on you now at some point. You've outgrown all of the laws around you. But isn't it interesting that societies try to do prohibition, and what happens? You put your hand down on it here, and up comes organized crime. And you're like, how does all this happen? Because laws aren't the be-all to things. And God just says, here's what I'm going to do. Instead of that, I'm giving you a law of love. Jesus came to say, act in love. Do the loving thing. Okay, when you think about that, again, well, just give me a list, Jesus. How often do I need to go to the temple? He said, as often as you find yourself being used of the Lord there and hearing from God there. What? Communion, how often do I do it? He says, as often as you do this, do it in remembrance of me. Isn't that interesting? I have pored over Scripture for some of these things over the decades that I've done this. And it's funny because people ask me, how often do you guys do communion? Because I came from a thing where we did it every week. And I said, well, how often did Jesus say to do it? Well, I don't know. He said, well, as often as you do it in remembrance of me. So you go like, well, how frequently is frequently enough to still have it be sacred and something? You go, well, then do it at home if you need it more frequently. And you go, no, only the church can do it. And you go, why? Where does it say that? Why does it have to come from a person? Well, that person wears a robe. Where'd they get the robe? Well, I don't know. And you go like, I never asked these questions. And God said, I wanted you to ask these questions. I wanted you to ask them because questions, but don't people get nervous when you start asking questions? Have you noticed this? They do things like crucify people like Jesus, right? Because he asks some really tough questions, which is, why do you guys concentrate on washing your hands and you never wash your heart? Because your heart is hardened and you're taking advantage of people, but you're doing it with clean hands. And they went like, we got to get rid of this guy. This guy's a mess, right? But that's what they've done with the prophets. But isn't it interesting? There's even a parable, and I point this one out, and it'll connect with you if you've seen it. It says that the landowner sent servant, and he finally said, man, they just keep killing my servants. Maybe they'll respect my son. And they said, hey, this guy's the heir. If we kill him, we kill the whole family line. And so instead of respecting him more for being the son, they disrespected him more for being the son. And Jesus says, that's what y'all going to do. And that's what religion does. And it doesn't have to be one of the big bad ones that are out there. Christianity has been a pretty big bad religion sometimes too, when it starts to resemble more the things of shadow than the things of substance. Ooh, man, can I get in trouble for saying things like that? Might end up teaching in a little upper room of a little tiny place to a few people and having to put it on the internet. But here's the thing. Hypothetically. So, this is what I wrote down here. It takes a new habit to break an old habit. I put in the Taster's Choice freeze-dried instant coffee. Talk about something nasty. I can tell you, I don't even like the smell of this, and I'm a coffee guy, and I'm not trying to be like an elitist coffee guy. I can drink any kinds of coffee, but I ain't drinking that. All right, but they sell this stuff at a ton. Taster's Choice. And so to some extent in life, God gave Taster's Choice, and he said, do you like the taste of law? Yeah, I do. Just give me the 10 commandments. Don't give me the 2 commandments, love God, love others. Give me the 10. All right, I'll give you the 10. Okay, I never killed anyone. And Jesus said, did you hate someone? Because that's where it started. It started in the heart. I guess I have hated a few people. See, Jesus lifted it and was trying to change our taste to where we immediately go, I like the freeze-dried stuff. And he goes, I thought it was funny. You won't be able to see it from there, but this is actually kosher. It even has a stamp of kosher on it, just to make it really funny. But it takes a new habit to break an old habit. And this is true in life, and God knows it. And that's why the message of the book of Hebrews, when you go home and read it, and when we read it here, and if you miss a week, it's okay because there's an attendance taken, right? But the point is, through it, you're going to see that they tasted grace and they said, yeah, but my Taster's Choice is, I don't know. My mom said I can't have that. I can't do that. And you go, I know. The priest looked down on me the other day, and he even gave me a whole trip about why. And I know. I feel so alone sometimes. I feel like going back to I know. It was the whole of the picture in the Old Testament of them going to the promised land, right? They were going to Canaan, the new land. And in the wilderness, there was a lot of wandering and wondering. And they kept saying, let's go back to slavery in Egypt. We missed the food. The food was so good. And they're like, you were a slave, man. Why did you want to leave so badly? Well, I did, but I didn't know it was going to be this hard. And so it takes a new habit to break an old habit. And this is what Hebrews, the writer, is trying to get his or her compatriots to know. Could have been a female author. Maybe that's why she stayed quiet. But it takes a new habit to break an old habit. It takes a new way of thinking to break an old way of thinking. I think of, if my habit is laziness, I need to get in the habit of not being lazy. If my habit is procrastination, doesn't procrastination just feel easy? It's just the default when I'm not thinking about forward progress. And so grace is not something that just kind of happens. It's a place that you go. It's a place that you go and you say, I want to stay here. There's going to be battles here, just like there were battles in Egypt. But I'll take these. I'll take the battles of Canaan over the battles of Egypt, because I will wander. I didn't go through the wilderness just to go back to that. I didn't go through the last, how many years is it, Lynn? X number of years, 20-something years, 25 years. Let's see, 93 is when I really got serious, I think, about the Lord, and so did you. So what is that? Help me. 27 years. I didn't go through all of that to get to this and go back, but there's times where I go, you know what? Let's just make it easy. Let's just give them 3 check boxes to check and be done. No. And this is one of the warnings. If you read Hebrews, it's hot. It's got some spicy stuff in it. It's got some warnings that people choke on it and burn their lips on it and burn their life on it because they just look at it, right? And they forget. Just cool down, chill out, read that and understand it in its context. There's people who have done whole doctrines on 3 sentences from Hebrews, and they don't know what the whole book's about, but they know what that warning's about. And they'll bust someone with, look, you went back and there's no recourse if you ever go. And you go, wait a minute. Who is the thing that says content is hot for? It's for the person dumb enough to spill it in their lap. I mean, at some point, I'm like, no shaming here, but I'm like, it's hot. When they hand me a coffee, it's hot. There's truths that are hot and hard and difficult, but that doesn't mean that you go, no, that's not for me. And so when you think about this, the contents of Hebrews may be hot. I have to warn you, if you don't want that, don't get into it. And it's easy to stop at the shadow and not go to the substance. Grace, I've sniffed it. Yeah, it smells good. I sniffed it in church today. And God gave me a lab session of it at home, and I had to treat the person next to me with grace. I got bitter. Well, had a little oat look to it. It's really nice. Okay, go on to the substance. What was it? Because I'll bring this up again, but it's good to hear it in case this is the only chance you get. Sometimes when you put something hot in something, that's when you really find out what's in there, right? And going through difficult things in my life, the things that spill out and over of that's part of what God was trying to do with grace. So it's not a one and done thing. And so this is what I want to leave us with as we start this, which is religion is just shadow. It's just shadow. And anyone who, you're very religious. I deal with it, so do you. There's times in life people will tell me, Scott, you are very religious. I go, okay, I know what you're trying to say, but I love it when I've had this happen. These are some of my favorite compliments. I know people who've known me for a long time and are shocked to find out not only that I'm religious, but that I'm a pastor. They're like, you don't look like a pastor. You don't act like a pastor. You don't treat me like a pastor. And I'm like, good. I consider that a compliment. There was a young man who told me point blank, I am an atheist. Can you put up with that? I said, sure, I'm not. Can you put up with that? And I said, I will be happy to explore your version of atheism if you'll, just can I take you, you need a ride somewhere? You can ride in my car, and you tell me about your atheism, And not an atheist by profession today. Like when I think about it, I'm like, I didn't change him. Grace changed him. Right? But I didn't need to change him in that moment. Before you get in this car, I need to see your statement of faith. Or you have to come to my way of thinking before you can do anything. And a relationship is substance. It's substance and it's messy. It's the Messiah's mission and was messy. He had to be willing to sit with people that they said, why is he with the tax collectors, prostitutes, wine bibbers, and gluttons? And it's like, because that's who God would rather hang out with than you bunch of people. And you know what? Truthfully, they wanted to hang out with him because he didn't shame them for things, but their game changed. What's amazing about it is their shadows that they'd hidden behind, he didn't let them do that either. He brought substance to their life. And you see time and time and time again, someone who had been shamed by religion and sent to the outskirts because of it. Jesus went out to him, sat down next to him and said, what's for lunch? Because I don't even have a lunch pail. Could you get me some water? Why are you talking to me? You're not supposed to talk to me. I'm a bad woman from the wrong side of town. He said, because I'm thirsty. And I think about those things and I go, religion he had to send his disciples away because they would have messed it up. And I think about that. I want to be, and I want you to be, I want us to be, I want anyone who wants to be the kind of people that God wouldn't have to send away to do his work. Like, hey, Scott, I'll tell you what. Why don't you go into town and do something because I got somebody I want to talk with, and you go, gosh, I would love to be the guy that God says, hey, I would like you to sit down on the edge of that thing and ask them about their world and listen to that long enough and earn some right to be able to be not through a rite or a ritual or even thinking I'm right, but actually knowing that Jesus is the last and best word to the world, and a little grace goes a long way. Tasting strong grace is what this book's about, so that people would go forward enough into it that they have the real thing and not just the smell of it. Again, where you smell like Christianity, and it's like, yeah, but it's not deep. It's not down deep. It's just on my clothes. And when I think about that, that's what this book is about. Hebrews and tasting strong grace. So hope it'll be fun for you like it is for me. God, thank you for this. Thank you for the message that you brought down to us. You didn't ask us to climb up to it, but you brought it down and put it in a cup, and it was a cup of suffering for you, but it's a cup of salvation for us. And I pray that we would really, really begin to drink deeply enough of these things, think through them, wrestle through them, toss aside the things that are truly just a shadow. But on the way to that we would be able to have not just a nothingness and more darkness, but actually see the light and the substance that's created that shadow in such a way that it would draw us to it. We would be able to see it without being overly intimidated, so we'd stay away from the light. You brought it to us in such a way that you gave us little sips of grace, into such a way that now it's an acquired taste, and it can even become an addiction. I would proudly say that I have tried to replace all of the things that would destroy my life and others with an addiction to Jesus and grace and freedom for myself and others. And we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. There it is.